Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us again for another episode of the South Texas Power Lunch. I'm here with Robert Miggins from Big Sun Solar. Robert, thanks for coming
Yeah.
on the show today. We
Happy to
appreciate
be
you.
here, man.
We're going to talk a lot about sustainability. We're going to talk a lot about some alternatives to financing your project or your company, as well as some key things about how do you promote your company and the sales component of this that Robert brings some expertise in. So again, thanks for coming on. I'm looking forward to talking about all this. Let's start off, as we always do, to talk about the journey for you, the journey for Big Sun Solar. Go ahead and give us that story of how you got to where you are today.
Wow. Okay. Well, I'll try to do this quickly. I guess the quick way to summarize it is I was a technology executive after getting an MBA and getting out of college and having a couple of starter jobs. Went back and got an MBA. I spent 15 years in technology in the sort of late 90s and up through the next 15 years. I came to the realization during the tail end of that period of time that I was actually just a lot more drawn to renewable energy, and whether that was electric cars or wind or solar, I felt like I was reading more about the changes in that space, a lot more just genuinely interested as time went by, and so I did a mid-career pivot from tech to energy because I decided we're going to hear about climate change for the rest of my life.
Right.
It's real. It's a problem. I'm a native Houstonian. I have a lot of family in the oil and gas business. Science doesn't lie. It's a huge problem.
Right.
I have 4 children. It's going to be a huge problem for them. So that's the realization I came to. And so then I decided, well, why not be a part of at least a small part of the solution? You know, we can dig ourselves out of this hole that we've dug for ourselves. It's going to be expensive, but it's completely doable. So as I figured those thoughts out in my head, I decided, well, I think I need to address that career-wise. So and some other things happened. So I ended up quitting my job and deciding I wanted to get into solar. I wasn't sure exactly what that was going to look like. And that was sort of chapter 2 of the story. I was really fortunate to meet our co-founder, Jason Pittman, 6 months into that sort of transition for myself. And I was dabbling with a couple of different companies here in town that were, doing different things in solar. And one thing led to another, and Jason and I ended up starting a company instead of, I previously thought I was going to join somebody else's company that needed help scaling, which is what I had done in the technology space for the last 15 years, growing large service providers at Rackspace and at Pier 1 Hosting. Instead, Jason and I decided to start our own solar company, and and it's going great. So we're 14 people, and we're having a great time. We're busy. And like I said, we're trying to just do a small part to try to help, our state sort of pivot towards renewable sources of electricity.
You were very humble in talking about the first chapter of before that pivot, but we had talked earlier, and you've got a very robust sales business development experience on that. Talk a little bit about that, because I want to talk a lot about how that applies into running your startup and how you focus it. Talk about those days of the banking, Dell, those sort of things.
Yeah, well, I mean, to be honest, I was one of those, as a young man, in college, interviewing for jobs, you would get the question like, hey, tell me about your 5-year plan. Sometimes I would get that question, and I never had a 5-year plan. I just didn't.
Right.
And so I always felt like I had to wing it and just make up an answer.
I was going to say, how many of those are really just made up answers? I guess maybe today there's
most
a
of
little bit
them.
more.
Maybe I'm just too honest. But I was troubled by that because I was like, well, gosh, does everyone else out there have this magic 5-year plan written down? And I'm the one guy that hasn't figured it out. And so that's not really an answer to your question around business development. I guess I've learned a lot about my strengths. One of the things we did a lot of at Rackspace in the early days was strengths finders and helping people understand these are the types of things I'm really good at.
Right.
And therefore, these are the types of roles that I think I would flourish in. And then here are some roles I probably wouldn't be very good at. And so, I think I'm more of a relationship, sales, marketing, business development, partnership-driven leader. Jason Pittman, on the other hand, is a brilliant engineer, very creative around business models, around thinking of things other folks just don't think about. And so somehow between the two of us, it seems like it just really works. Like our strengths complement each other, and it's a key part of how we've been able to have some early success is, building on my strengths and building on his strengths.
It's interesting when you talk about you and your partner and that kind of yin and yang and those, strengths. I mean, you look at, Jobs, Wozniak, there's others, Gates, and the name of
Steve Allen.
Yeah. You have a lot of that, strengths that are combined together from a technical, from the sale to, vision, culture building, those sort of things that really combined have made some amazing things in our history. How did you guys connect, and how did you, kind of a question, how do y'all separate what one person's done versus the other and kind of work together as a partnership? Because partnerships, as a lawyer, I would tell you, if there's two people that are in control, there has to be clear understanding of one another and a good working relationship, because, in any sort of relationship that there's just two people, you can come to a deadlock. How do you guys work together so well and have had such success? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Really important, that's a great question. I think it starts with having a lot of common ground. So, I mentioned, I came to this realization that I just wanted to be a part of the future of energy. And I also am a capitalist. Like, I love the idea of, I'm a pragmatic environmentalist. Like, this is a problem, we better do something about it. And you can do something about it. And if you show up and work hard and do a great job, you can thrive, right? This is not a charity. We look to have margin, and we want to create jobs and careers for people, and we want to win. But it starts with, there's a problem that I'm drawn to being part of fixing this problem. I almost feel like I wanted to enlist the way Americans enlisted after Pearl Harbor. I know it may not be the best analogy, but I honestly feel like I want to raise my hand to be part of that solution. Jason comes from the same perspective. He is very more so than I am, I think, just because he's got an extra decade of experience in renewables, more than a decade than I do. And so I think it starts with we come from the same perspective, which is our purpose as a company is to help save the planet. We actually went beyond the words climate change. And so why is climate change a problem? Well, it's because it's hurting the planet. And that's really why we're in it. So I think it helps that we wake up in the morning sort of trying to solve that same problem, or at least be a small part of solving that problem. In addition, there's some things that Jason is probably a lot more passionate about and has a lot more experience in, specifically around low-income solar, and how can we bring solar, the benefits of solar savings to those who need it the most, energy-burdened families and things like that I feel strongly about too, but Jason really feels strongly about. So then how do we figure out who does what, which is kind of your core question. Thankfully we're a small company, and I think when we face big decisions, we check in with each other. Like neither one of us is off signing term sheets without, or something like that.
Yeah.
If it's a key pricing decision, hey, do we want to price this particular project this way? We might have to cut margin. We might have to, be more aggressive than normally. We make those decisions together. And thus far, it's worked out great.
Do you think, we've had, oh my goodness, out of 20 episodes, I want to say we've probably had 11 people that have somehow been aligned with Rackspace.
Yeah.
Rackspace culture is legendary. It's fantastic. A lot of it was team-based. Again, a lot of it was self-development, self-awareness, those sort of things. How much of it do you think that the culture of team building and working in teams, which I'm sure you've had the same experience, it was very team-based. How much of that has played into, your ability to be a leader there at Big Sun Solar?
Yeah, I think it's a big part of it, actually. One of the, I would say, I was at Rackspace in the really early days. So I think my frame of reference around Rackspace and my time there was also very small company. If you have a great idea, test it quickly and take some chances. And if it works, great. And if it doesn't, then reverse. So kind of this fail faster mentality.
Yeah.
In addition to really getting great at building teams and building culture. And I think one of the things that Jason and I both try to do is hire great people, put them in a position to be successful, help them when they need help, but also kind of stay out of their way and trust them. We're not trying to create a culture where people have to ask permission to do their jobs. Our perspective instead is, we hired you, you have a good head on your shoulders, we trust you that you're going to make smart decisions, and so we want to, in some respects, just enable you and then get out of your way and then support you. I think that stems from the way we started Rackspace. I didn't start it, but the way Rackspace worked for the 4 years that I was there was very much to have sort of a trusting culture and hire great people and enable them to be successful, as opposed to this very top-heavy kind of rules-driven, that's not your decision, stay in your lane.
Hierarchy.
Yeah, that's right.
Create that bureaucratic mentality at the beginning, and it can have some limitations.
Right.
And the reason I ask is, just talking to you and thinking through this right now, we've got a lot of people here been very successful. They're very tech heavy in their experience. So their product or their platform, they were the ones, literally the engineer or the developer that had their hands on the product, and now they're moving to the next level of really leadership. And leadership from a culture standpoint, because the captain determines the culture of the ship, all the way to the leadership and the ability to work with investors and a board and those sort of things. So one of the other pieces is, we talk about sustainability.
Yeah.
What are some key considerations for sustainability? I'm going to just keep it from the company. I know we're going to talk a lot more about sustainability for the environment, but talk about those key considerations for sustainability for a business. What should a founder be thinking about?
Well, gosh, I mean, it depends on how boldly you want to step into that question. I'll give you an example.
Let's go bold.
Here's a great example. Microsoft made an announcement, gosh, it's probably 4 years ago now, that they were going to offset the carbon footprint of their company and backdate it to its founding in the 70s. So somehow they have this really complicated algorithm that's going to say, this is how much software we have built and sold for decades. This is our Xbox business. This is our cloud hosting business. This is our Word and Excel and PowerPoint. Somehow they're striving to calculate the carbon footprint of all of their software back to the beginning of their founding, and then to reverse that and to offset that. Incredibly bold. I actually am surprised it didn't get more press.
Yeah.
It got our attention because we thought, man, I've heard of people saying we're going to go net zero.
Correct.
They're going net zero and backwards.
Right. They're rewinding the clock.
Right, which I thought was really bold. And now maybe we know why their software is so expensive for all those years. So it's not, but anyway.
That's called monopoly, but that's another conversation.
Yeah. Not anymore.
Yeah.
We're all over Google Docs. But anyway, it got our attention. It got Jason and I talking, and we thought, okay, what would it take for us to look at our carbon footprint? We're a 6-year-old company now, 7-year-old company. I think we were a 4-year-old company at the time with fewer employees. But it prompted us to go, okay, well, how many of our people have electric cars versus gas-powered cars? How far do people commute to get to work?
Oh, wow.
How many miles are we all putting on? How much do we travel, air travel? What are our power bills in the office? How many square feet do we have? It actually prompted some pretty interesting considerations for us. And we calculated, what would it take for us to follow Microsoft's lead? And then how would we offset that carbon footprint? Would it be all solar? Would it be planting a lot of trees, which actually is probably the best way to do it?
Right.
If you can guarantee that tree is going to live and thrive. Right. So I think it was really neat how, another company with really big ambitions kind of influenced us to at least calculate that number. And we came up with a number of what it was going to, I think it was $115,000
Wow.
So we thought, okay, well, that's a number. You know, what if we did half of that?
Right.
You know, how do we strive towards that?
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's a good example, but
No, I think it's a great example.
Yeah.
I mean, you're creating sustainability, and for you especially, right? That sustainability connects to your purpose that you just stated earlier, which is to save the planet.
Yeah. And by the way, you know, that also has helped us reframe some of the ways that we think about our staff. So we have folks that work from home. And so they're very, you know, they're very efficient. They're very effective. And for family reasons or just for lifestyle reasons, they choose to work from home as opposed to drive into the office every day.
Sure.
So the question, you know, the old school mentality is no, get in the office. We're all in the office.
Right.
COVID, of course, has turned a lot of that stuff upside down. But now also, we like, you know, if she can be more effective at home, and she can have a higher quality of life with her family, or he can with his family, and they're not commuting.
Right. There's your carbon footprint is shrinking.
It's like a win-win. It's like a three-way win. You know, it's better for the planet. It's better for him or her and their family, and it's probably better for our company because that employee is more effective. So it's also helped us sort of bring in culture and the carbon thing together, and to reframe the way we think about, do people really need to drive downtown and park and come to work every day? And in some cases they do.
Correct. You know, it's interesting. And again, that's why I love doing these, because I get to have really interesting conversations. You know, COVID didn't get us to think about the carbon footprint, right? But it got us to thinking about the necessity of our patterns, right?
Yeah.
That create actually climate impact. You know,
Yeah.
do you really have to drive all the way into the office? The answer in some circumstances, yes.
Maybe
but in
not
many
5 days a
circumstances,
week,
no, right?
Yeah.
What's happening now, which I find really interesting, at least I see it, is with the energy prices skyrocketing for consumers. Yesterday I was out in Shirts with a client at lunchtime. The price was $4.09 a gallon. And I drive an F-250, so I'll work on my carbon footprint reduction. Yeah. But I drove back out there to take my daughter to soccer yesterday, 4 hours later, and it was 20 cents more.
More.
And it's interesting now because COVID got us to think about our patterns and the necessity of our patterns. But like for me, I've been even thinking too, like now because I'm actually have an economic impact of these type of decisions and these patterns to go, is it really smart for me to be driving an F-250? You know, yes, it's hurting my pocketbook, you know, prices are going up. And so it's interesting how now I think this is going to become even more to the forefront and more, you know, visual for people because it's hitting them directly in their checkbook.
Yeah. And by the way, let's get an electric F-250.
Or
F-150. I mean,
there is an F-150 that says it's coming, and I'm looking for it.
Yeah, I was able to. No, I didn't test drive it. I was able to ride in the passenger seat. Ford came to town and took over the Pearl, and you could ride in the new Ford Lightning, and it was pretty awesome.
Well, I have an F-250 because I pull an RV, so I need it to get some more torque in it, which it will come.
It's coming.
It will come. It will come.
It's coming.
But what's interesting too is you go back to the old cap and trade, which, you know, sometimes comes back up. But I want to say, what was it, the late 90s that really it came to the forefront, you know, on there, which was going to allow you to economically offset your carbon footprint.
Right.
The question you probably didn't know was coming is, do you think that's going to be coming back as now more companies look for offsets? And they don't really have, I mean, you just said, right, I want to offset. I want to be able to, but planting a tree, but it could be that way. Solar, we'll check that box and we're done. But now energy consumption, you know, we're greater society. Do you think those type of things are going to come back to where people can find ways to offset through carbon credits?
You know, that's a tough question because it's really, I think it comes down to like the balance between free market, you know, let the markets solve these problems versus government mandates and regulation. Unfortunately, I don't think the free markets are going to solve these problems fast enough.
Right.
I'm all for free markets and having sort of the market decide that people should buy a different vehicle when they're turning over their vehicle. But you know, take for instance how utilities create and generate electricity, which is a really big source of you know, carbon. that needs to be changing a lot more aggressively and a lot more quickly. That technology and the cost is getting pretty compelling.
Yeah.
But I think it's a mixture of free market and sort of some government mandates and regulation. In Europe, they're a lot more serious about carbon tax and things like that.
Yeah.
We are a very free market society here in the U.S. and I respect that. So it's practically speaking, I think it's going to be hard to kind of rip that freedom mentality out of sort of the fabric of the business climate in the United States.
You and I share this the same thought, because I was just talking to my son actually. So they had to pass a bill, like the mini Congress that they do in schools. And
Okay,
stuff.
cool.
And he was talking to me like, Dad, certain people didn't vote for certain bills and stuff. And that was one of the things is, well, if government makes a decision very quickly and tries to make abrupt change, that has adverse consequences.
Yeah.
Versus the free market, I believe as well.
Yeah.
If you give it time, capitalism will be able to solve those.
Yeah.
At a better risk allocation than
Yeah.
just government making a swift stroke of the pen.
Right.
With all the unintended consequences, which will ripple across.
Right. Well,
jobs, those sort of things, which typically happen for those type of.
bills. Let me try to just add one other element to that dialogue, which is more sort of closer to home. We sell solar to Texas businesses. And we also partner with utilities. But to the extent that we're in front of a business who is thinking about solar for the roof of their building or carports in their parking lot, it is a financial conversation. It is not, we don't lead with green elements, right? If that business was a super green business, they would have bought solar 5 years ago. So if it doesn't pencil out nicely from a return perspective, it's a quick meeting because they're not going to do it.
Right.
And solar pencils out, but it does because there's a federal tax credit.
There you go.
At 26%, which helps pay for a substantial part of your investment as a business. There's also a local rebate which helps as well. And so I think it's a combination of like some programs to drive the adoption of solar, and then businesses that will look at it and go, well, heck, that's a 13% return on my money. That's pretty good. Keep talking. I want to hear more. So actually, I think that's a great example, and that works. We've built our business based on the ability to get businesses in Texas, in San Antonio, Texas, to see the benefits of a renewable energy investment that also happens to have a nice return.
My son's going to end up, you're going to watch this, Noah. I know you are, because we talked about this yesterday. Because the perfect example of incentivizing the right behavior versus penalizing.
Yeah,
behavior.
It's more carrot.
If
not
you do,
stick.
if you do more carrot, like you said, right, you are incentivizing the right behavior to occur to get it, versus a carbon tax, which just penalizes and has adverse effects.
Right.
Let me change a little bit to what you brought up on the utilities. Talk a little bit about your consumer, or I would say customer segments.
Sure.
You've got your businesses, which you've talked about, but talk a little bit also what you do with the utilities.
Yeah, sure. So we were selected by CPS Energy here in San Antonio to build a 5 megawatt community solar project for their customers. So they put out an RFP. We, along with I think 7 other companies, responded to it, and we were selected. 5 megawatts of solar is about enough solar for about 500 homes.
Okay.
To give you an idea of what that means. So we were picked by the local utility. They picked the local team, which was wonderful.
That's great.
We built out a 5 megawatt solar community solar project and sold it to residential customers of CPS, mostly residential. Some businesses bought as well. The reason why, it's a very different business than selling solar to a Texas business where we're effectively the general contractor. They pay us some money, we build a project, we finish it.
Right.
They own the asset. We do some long-term maintenance and care and feeding of that system. We'll watch it for them to make sure it's performing. But for the most part, it's kind of a one-time transaction.
Right.
In the case of partnering with a utility, that's a 25-year contract. Where we're going to be selling power to CPS for the next 23 and a half years on behalf of these community solar customers.
Got it.
So it's those projects are harder to win. They come along less frequently. That being the opportunity to partner with a utility, but it represents enough solar for 500 homes. So what drives us is we want to deploy as many solar panels as fast as possible because that fits our mission. That's our purpose. And so the decision we go through is if this particular RFP opportunity is something we feel like we have something unique and credible that we can propose and we might get selected, then we're all over it. At the same time, if there was an RFP in Kentucky, we're probably just going to pass on it because we can't execute well. We're not big enough to chase business out of state, and they're probably not going to pick us anyway. So that's probably a waste of time. So we try to. So we were fortunate to be selected by CPS Energy. We built that project. It was 17,000 solar panels.
Wow!
It took us about 3 years to build it all out. But that advances our mission a lot faster than if we were doing 10 panels or 20 panels on 500 homes. That's I think a lot harder to win that business, at least. So we look at it, how do we have the biggest impact?
Sure.
And selling to businesses works. Partnering with utilities when those opportunities come along also works for us.
Let me ask you, ERCOT got all the bad press it could possibly get in Snowmageddon, especially since we were in the middle of COVID and couldn't go anywhere.
Right.
And then with snow, we really couldn't go anywhere. What do you foresee for Texas as far as bending that energy curve with sustainable energy? Do you see anything in the future like, hey, by 2030, we will, get to a point where we've got a sustainable grid because of sustainable and renewable sources that we've utilized within the grid? Any comments on that?
Yeah, I mean, there is a ton of wind and solar happening in the state of Texas. Not only on a lot of rooftops, particularly in San Antonio, because there's a local rebate, but really much more so in really large utility scale solar farms.
Okay.
Sort of in the sunnier parts of the state, but it's starting to flourish in lots of, all over the state. We're a big state. We have a lot of land. Texans get energy. There's just sort of a mentality that understands energy, and I think that mindset translates really nicely over to wind and over to solar, and that's why we're the #1 state for wind. I think that we're #2 for solar.
Okay.
So you may not know it, but there's a lot of solar happening in Texas already. I don't know that it specifically adds resilience.
Okay.
It does add some resilience to the ERCOT grid.
Right.
But not on its own. Like wind blows only when the wind is blowing and creates electricity when the wind is blowing. Solar creates electricity when the sun is out.
Right.
And so the big vision around that is how do you have batteries to
store
sort to smooth out that production curve.
Yeah.
And then you can really look at replacing coal, which is a really dirty source of energy. And then next you would sort of go after natural gas. I don't think we're there yet, so I think we need to have a mix for the next several years. But I think the biggest goal from a climate perspective is how do we get rid of the coal plants?
And I guess nuclear we don't hear much about.
I personally am in favor of more nuclear.
I am too,
I think just the pragmatic side of me says yes. We should be doing that safely.
Super clean,
but it's super clean, and I think it should come back. I think there's a space for that. But the other thing is, from a political perspective, we deregulated the energy markets in Texas in the late 90s, and I personally think the deregulation went too far and created the environment where we had this statewide power grid failure because it was too much of a free market system.
Right, and the examples of somebody's bill of $10,000, because of the fact that they were exposed in the market really
and
hit
just
home.
last weekend, because it's been 100+ degrees in early to mid-May. The ERCOT grid has been struggling, and some of those spiky prices have been happening in May. Normally, you just think about it as we'll worry about that in August.
Right.
Snowmageddon happened in February. So, I still think we've got a lot of work to do.
Yeah, no, the weather here, I grew up here. I remember, we had, I want to say like in the 90s, we had 30 days of 100+ degree heat. It was like a record of 30 or 40.
Right.
Seems like this year. I'm just kind of feeling it. Like,
Yeah.
it seems like when we're already in the hundreds, consecutive days in early May,
Right.
we might be as well. And it just brings, again, rising prices. It
Yeah.
brings it more to the forefront.
I also think Snowvid has created, people are thinking about energy a lot more.
Sure.
They're thinking about, wait a second, how did we lose power for 5 days?
Yeah.
What should I be doing? How do I need to change the way I think? Maybe I need a battery at home. Maybe I need a generator at home just to keep my family safe and warm or cool, whatever the case might be.
Right.
So I think it's created, not that it's a great silver lining, but maybe there's a silver lining
But
where it's created awareness.
Yeah, I mean, awareness. Unfortunately, it's those kind of big events that give you that perspective to it. So there's a positive from those.
Yeah.
You talked a lot about, really the capital that you haven't talked about the capital. I want to talk about the capital, but you've got your Texas business where you're basically the general contractor. And then you go to the utilities, which is a longer term play, and there's some resale. Can you talk a little bit about, from an equity standpoint, how you guys approach your different project-based financings, whether it's the Texas-based business all the way to dealing with the utilities? Because most of the founders here, that come in, they're used to the whole, well, I just go raise another round of capital.
Yeah.
I'll deploy that with the new revenue or the new growth that I'm going to get, and then that'll burn that cash until I get to the next round. But that's not the model you guys have as you're building a sustainable business. Can you speak a little bit to how y'all do your financing?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, having come from tech and having seen a lot of startups here in town, of course, there's I'm going to sell 20% of my company. There's basically one legal entity, one LLC. And in our case, for instance, when we were selected by CPS, we set up a separate legal entity, which allowed us to capture the tax credits out of that project and sell them, a portion of them.
Sure.
Which was an important part of how we pulled the project off. I will also say, from a startup perspective, the size of that project was small enough to where we didn't have to dilute our ownership at all. So we were able to bootstrap that project completely in-house. And then we sold the tax credits, which is important, but it doesn't change the ownership of the core company.
Right.
Anything that we're moving to in the future, other projects that we're looking that are on the utility side of things, there's sort of 3 legs of the stool. There's debt, there's tax equity, which is basically selling your tax credits,
right,
and then there's cash equity,
right,
sponsor equity. So any of these future projects that we're looking at are beyond 5 megawatts. They're more like 20, 30, or 40 megawatts sized projects. So that would get out past our ability to fund those projects in-house. Also, if you think about our mission, we're trying to deploy as much solar as fast as possible. So if we can bring in a capital partner that makes those headaches easier, that means we don't spend weeks on out of a month raising money. We spend more time developing solar and let the guys and gals that raise money do that really well. Then collectively we move faster. We move forward faster. So we're moving into that phase where we're bringing on capital partners that would help us and handle all of those challenges quickly, so that we can actually do what we're really good at, which is develop solar projects for utilities and for the open market. So anyway, kind of a long-winded answer, but I think you typically set up, each project would have a separate legal entity, and you raise funding or you bring your own funding for that particular project. So it's probably more like a real estate, maybe, a GP and LPs around different real estate projects. Maybe that's a better mentality.
Well, and again, you're one of the first guests that utilize this. Is extremely typical in the private sector. But one of the important things you just talked about is it was non-dilutive.
Yeah.
Which is huge. The second part is, a lot of people, smart people like you, in the energy, real estate, they've learned to basically monetize that future income from the tax benefits. And there's ways to be able to do that. we're going to be talking in a future episode about some revenue-based financing, which is somewhat similar,
Yeah.
different, but somewhat similar, which is taking that future income
Yeah.
stream or benefit.
Recurring revenue.
Right,
Yeah.
and then monetizing that to sell that piece, which is non-dilutive. Now you don't get that revenue stream or that tax credit,
Right.
but it allows you to generate cash today that you can,
Or you can borrow against it.
or you can borrow against it,
Yeah.
right, and leverage that up.
Yeah.
So it's a unique way that, you know, I think is bringing more into the forefront of startups, specifically in non-tech, but some in tech with these revenue-based financing that have, you know, an MRR, which is attractive to a potential lender,
Yeah.
you know, for those sort of things.
Yeah.
One of the things I wanted to ask you here, kind of as we wrap up, that I'm curious about, because, you know, we talked just a little bit about the rack space, the banking, and your sales experience, your business development experience. What do you think is the one lesson as a business developer, salesperson, that has helped you the most in growing your company?
Wow. You know, there's I think what Jason and I have been pretty good at is learning how to say no to stuff. So, you know, there's a temptation to go, oh, we could do that, and we could do that, and we can do that, and you can, but at some point you're not focused, and you're just kind of you're drifting a little bit, and you're chasing work all over the place. Thankfully, we've, I think, been pretty good about saying, for instance, you know, when we first started the company, we did residential solar installation for homeowners, and we did business. You know, we sold to businesses and homeowners. Relatively quickly, we realized that homeowner space, it's pretty crowded, it's competitive, and we were getting some traction in the business market, which is harder to crack.
Right.
And so we said, why don't we do just that and let the residential folks fight over that work? So we peeled back and said, no, we just sell to businesses. So hopefully we'll continue to have discipline to sort of do fewer things and do them really well.
Well, let me dig in. I'm going to ask a question I think I know the answer, which lawyers, you never ask the question unless you know the answer. What was your criteria for the yes or no decisions? Like, was there an overarching criteria that you had of, like, I mean, residential, I'm sure there's an economic, was it the only one, or were there other factors that you used as a guiding post?
Yeah. No, that's interesting. So I think it was marketing. You know, marketing would have to be really different. You know, we would have a different marketing approach to do lead gen around how to drive residential interest. And we thought that was going to be quite different.
Yeah.
The folks, I mean, gosh, I get robocalls, and
I do too.
It just pisses me off.
Yeah.
So I also just don't like how kind of Wild West that space is.
Yeah.
There's folks that are just walking neighborhoods and knocking on doors,
Yeah.
and that is okay if you're selling an honest product. A lot of times, it's too good to be true.
It's a lot like the roofers that come by after a hailstorm.
It is. And so we thought, okay, that's a whole different lead gen. So marketing was going to be really different. We'd have to hire, I guess, a bunch of sort of 100% commission salespeople.
Yeah.
We just decided that's just a different animal. And so marketing and lead gen was going to be different. Also, you really make better money. You know, we have a mentality of we're not just going to sell stuff and flip it. Mm-hmm. We want to build these projects. We want to install them, and we want to make sure they're performing long term, which means if you're going to have a bunch of small rooftops to make installations for, you probably have to have your own crew.
Right.
You have to hire, and well, you could sub that out. But at some point, you want to bring in your own crew. So It just felt like a different model. And I think what we're doing now is we have a couple of really important subcontractors that are really great for us. And allows us to, you know, we design the project, we permit it, it's built according to our specs, and then we monitor it long term to make sure it's performing. So we were able to kind of strike the balance between we're going to do fewer things, but we're going to maintain the kind of control that we promised our customer we would deliver for them, instead of like build it and skip town and stop answering your phone.
Right.
That's not our mentality, right? We run into our customers at HEB. Mm-hmm. You know, I'm selling on my reputation. Jason, our whole team, we're in it for the long haul. So anyway, so I think we've been able to strike the balance between, you know, having quality work, but also not having to scale up to, we can't profitably bring all that in house
Right.
when demand is too unpredictable.
No,
So I think it's kind of a constant balance.
Well, this has been a great conversation on sustainability, both at the culture there at Big Sun Solar, as well as our environment here.
Yeah, it's fun.
I really appreciate you coming today and spending the time with us. Look forward to seeing even more of those projects. If you're listening to us on our audio version, go ahead and leave us a response or comment. Let us know if we're adding value. Subscribe would be great as well. If you're watching us on YouTube or one of our clicks, same thing. Subscribe to our podcast. Leave us a comment. Let us know we're leaving you some value. We'll put in the description how to get a hold of Big Sun Solar if your needs are there for what they're doing, and we'll see you next time.